high profile in recent films like Black Hawk Down, and have got a long history going back to Rogers Rangers and in the colonial wars. But ultimately, they're masters of fieldcraft, masters of patrolling, and they're sort of the extreme infantrymen, and usually the first into the fight, into the conventional fight. Whereas Special Forces and Green Berets are more focused on operations deep behind enemy lines and teaching and fighting counterinsurgency. It's funny because counterinsurgency is all the rage in current doctrine, and yet, you know, you could say that we're fighting a Special Forces war these days because everyone's a counterinsurgent. But Rangers are more sort of the first line of offense in American military action.
And what did you have to do to become a Ranger?
Well, I went to Ranger School twice, buddy. I finished UCLA, went and didn't graduate. I hurt my leg and hadn't gotten a pass on my patrol in the Florida or jungle phase, and so I went back as a captain. But it's I think it's only 8 weeks now. It was a 10-week course. It was 2.5 months at the time I went through it, and it exposes you to 4 different environments, 3 now. There used to be a desert phase, and they sort of cut that out. But desert, jungle, mountain, and the initial phase there at Fort Benning they call the Darby phase after Darby's Rangers. But it's 2.5 months of suck. It's a meal a day, about 2 to 4 hours sleep a night, and extreme physically, with a lot of physical activity, a lot of patrolling, a lot of tactical execution, and really, I guess the goal of Ranger School is to prove to you that there's nothing you can't do. And I feel that. I mean, I've got my tab on my shoulder, and you know, I challenge anybody to name any of those letters, because I always can give him that paragraph of the Ranger Creed, because it's something. It's more of a motto that I live by. So,
what was the most frequent advice you gave to people in the armed forces about dealing with the news media?
Oh, that's a great question, Luke. So there's some real basic counsel that I give, and the main thing I like to impart is that the media are not our enemy. The media, just as the military, you know, is part of America's defends America's freedoms by being willing to deploy and fight in combat. The press also guarantees America's freedoms by ensuring that that the people have witness, that people have access to the story being told. So I tend to tell soldiers real basic counsel like stay in your lane. You know, talk about what you do, so long as it's not violating operational security concerns. So your goal is to get your story told, and not to be afraid of the media, because they're just people, and you know, whether they represent a larger audience or not, you know, your goal is to get your story told. And so there's ways to deal with reporters, and you know, it's important that you speak to them as they're human beings, and you know, be relaxed, not worrying about too much about what you're saying, so long as you're talking about what you know, what you do, and what you have done. I guess the key thing would be, to abbreviate all that, is stay in your lane and talk about past operations, talk about what you're currently doing, but never talk about future operations, because that's where we get into the operational security violations.
What about giving their opinions on the wisdom of a particular conflict?
Yeah, so there's some very deliberate guidance. When people talk about being a soldier and giving up some of your freedoms to serve, that's not an underestimation. You do recognize that in becoming a service member in the United States, there are things you're prohibited from doing. I mean, I'm prohibited from engaging in any political activity in uniform on duty. You see some people violating that, going to political rallies in uniform and all that. That's a violation of regulation. But so there's constraints on what you can do, what you can say. Everyone's got an opinion, but the key thing is to caveat your opinion with, hey, speaking from my personal opinion, or what I personally believe is a good way of caveating that you're not speaking on behalf of the Department of Defense or the Department of the Army or whatever military institution that you represent. So, that's go ahead.
Sorry, are you allowed to say, I think the invasion of Iraq in 2003 was a bad idea? Are you or someone who you give advice to in the armed forces allowed to say, my personal opinion is that this is a bad idea?
Yeah, well, and just because something is authorized doesn't mean that it's prudent or wise. Because you're certainly going to receive some unwanted attention for criticizing the motives or the actions of those in political office. Because you get world-class service members like General David Petraeus, who has not voted since he was a full-bird colonel, because he realized once he's at the strategic level of warfare now, his job is to implement policy that's decided by someone regardless of their political stripe. And so, and you get some service members, I had a first sergeant who once, he had voted once, and then he enlisted, and he never voted in a 20-year career, because he figured that that's not his role. His role is to be the mailed fist of American foreign policy, and not someone that decides, how that policy is directed or run. Now, that's a different feeling than my own, but your job as a soldier, as a service member, is to execute the will of the state. Ultimately, when you take an oath, you swear to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to obey the orders of the President of the United States and those superior officers appointed over me. So,
If someone underneath you said, Lieutenant Colonel Strong, I want to speak out to the news media because I'm so upset by the ending of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I think this is a major mistake, and I want to speak out because I don't believe that people who are out with their homosexuality should be allowed in the armed forces. And I want to speak about this to the news media. What kind of advice would you give such a person?
Wow, that's a good question. I would encourage them to maintain their beliefs and to realize that in choosing to criticize a policy that is in the process right now of being implemented, the repeal of which is being implemented, that it is not prudent to question policy, in a public forum. Certainly, I'd be lying to you if I told you that soldiers don't talk about this, because they're talking about it an awful lot right now. But I also realize, as an officer, formerly as a public affairs officer, that our job is to not necessarily have an opinion in the public sphere, but to be that sort of unbiased, reliable entity that is the Department of Defense, that is a soldier, that is a member of the Army. There's a reason why service members consistently in the last several decades have had one of the highest reputations across any political stripe in the United States, and that's because they're not politically motivated as a general rule. They're more focused on just securing the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
How much interest do you perceive the American public has in what is going on in Iraq and Afghanistan, And does this level of interest surprise you?